Well, hello and welcome. You're watching Business Today. Now, the global construction industry is one of the top contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn is leading to rising temperatures, rising sea levels, flooded coastal areas, and more frequent forest fires, and of course, a lot more issues. But keeping all that aside, we also understand that sustainable revolution is underway in India, and it follows what the Prime Minister, of course, has been stressing on, be it at COP26 or at various international forums on the SDG 17 goals that India has been working on. Now, to look at it from an Indian Realty point of view, I'm joined by Mr. Sandeep Sethi, Managing Director, JLL Work Dynamics West Asia, to talk more on this. Hi, Sandeep. Thank you for joining us on Business Today.
Thanks, Karishma. Thanks for having me over.
But Sandeep, before we get into, of course, understanding the data and how have things changed for the realty sector in terms of the sustainable graph, I'd like you to first explain in simple terms to our viewers that what is the role of real estate in a green future?
It's a good question. The real estate has a big role to play in the green future. And the reason why is because research indicates that 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from real estate. So it is a big needle mover. So if you don't address real estate, we're going to leave a lot of untapped opportunities.
Right. Now, with the report that, of course, JLL has come out on, and this is addressing also with the Sustainability Week, what are the key insights from this? Also, if you could give a little information on how has the performance been for residential, commercial, and the luxury segment?
Look, from a sustainability point of view, and I'll focus on that because that's the theme of today's discussion. All sectors are pretty conscious of the fact that they have a role to play in driving sustainability. The commercial sector has been growing very fast on the back of growth in technology, IT, banking, financing type clients, etc. A lot of these occupiers, a lot of these large companies, they've committed to net zero targets globally. And obviously, they recognize the fact that real estate is something that needs to be addressed from a sustainability perspective. They have a lot of footprint in India, and they are looking at everything that can be done from the standpoint of reducing emissions in real estate. We are starting to see a lot more demand coming in from occupiers for green buildings. We're starting to see a lot of retrofits happening in existing portfolios as well. Besides rental and location, sustainability features or green features, they're very, very important when occupiers select real estate spaces for their offices. As far as residential is concerned, it is one of the fastest growing sectors in India. We're starting to see a lot of developers introducing green features. Unlike commercial spaces, we don't see many residential units signing up for green certifications. However, the pressure is on them to build more green townships or residential complexes. So you see a lot more green features, be it rainwater harvesting, orientation of the building to ensure that the cooling load's not as much. You see a lot more green power being sourced in many residential complexes as well. You will see in the years to come a lot more developers using green certification to market their properties as well. We're starting to see something very similar with other sectors like data centers and industrial warehousing as well. These two sectors are also doing very well in terms of their growth in India. Data centers use so much energy that if you don't address energy efficiency and also the supply side upfront, then it becomes very hard to make those changes down the road. So a lot of data centers come with green features upfront, and it becomes a big selling point to third-party operators when they sell their racks or their spaces to companies to come and put their servers in there. So it's really important for every sector. Certain sectors have an advantage in terms of how quickly they've or when they started off their journey, but other sectors are catching up as well. And even within the commercial space, you see different stakeholders trying to catch up with each other. You see the occupiers obviously ahead of the pack, but you see developers and investors trying to play catch up. But certainly there's a sense of seriousness, sense of sincerity and urgency in their efforts as well.
Yeah, Sandeep, it's a very interesting point that you'd raised on data centers, and I feel that it's ironical because, I mean, we were all looking at the digital and technological innovation, and that's why that is something that's the road ahead. But on the other side, if you see, then sustainability kind of really is an opposite notch to that. But like you mentioned, now there is an option of green data centers. But is that going to be cost efficient? I mean, that will definitely restrict certain companies to adapt.
Look, there is a green premium today. If you want to sign up for green features in a building, in a data center, or anything, any other asset class, you have to pay a premium. And that premium that most occupiers are willing to pay is up to 10%. But if you don't do it, there's going to be a brown discount, which means as an investor, as a landlord, if I don't have the green features, I'll have to market my property at 10% less than the market rate. So the flip side is worse. So it is, if I own a property and if I want to lease it out, I will have more buyers or more takers if I have green amenities or green features, as opposed to if I didn't. And with anything else, the higher the demand, the greater is the pressure to drive costs down as well. We saw that with solar power, right? Solar power used to be so expensive 10, 15, 12, maybe 10, 15 years ago. But now it's attained grid parity. In many places, it costs lower than traditional power source. And we're going to see the same innovation, the same cost reduction with other green products as well. So there will no longer be a green premium associated with green products after a while. But of course, there'll be innovation, there'll be new green products. But this is a journey that that's going to remain forever. But it's a supply-demand thing. The demand is so high that it is going to put a lot of pressure on cost to go down.
And in terms of these green assets, green products, have you seen an increase in demand in the last few years? I mean, have they variably also got better post the pandemic?
Yes, there's been an increase in demand for sure. The pandemic accelerated certain trends. So technology, for example, is where we've seen the most innovation happen in the last 2 years. And the reason was because there was a disruption in terms of labor supply pool, especially when you look at India, for example, there were lockdowns, we had a lot of reverse migration happening. So we had a shortage of supply of manpower. And that put a lot of pressure on different service industries to come up with technology-based solutions. At the same time, with sustainability, there's a lot of pressure on companies and different organizations to start measuring their carbon emissions. And you can't measure unless you have a good technology tool to capture the data. So the different events that have fast-forwarded or fast-tracked this drive towards automation and innovation. So absolutely, yes, we've seen a lot more sensor-based technologies come in the last 2 years. And had it not been for the pandemic, I think the pace wouldn't have been as fast.
Okay, interesting. If you could tell us, Sandeep, I mean, this of course need not be a proper number, but something approximately. Which cities in India, probably tier 1, tier 2 cities, are doing well when it comes to sustainable Indian real estate?
So look, the tier 1 cities are the top 7 cities that we track, that we have most of our business coming from, that are doing really well because we have a very organized ecosystem. And these are cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, NCR, Chennai, Hyderabad, Pune, Kolkata. So these 7, 8 cities are doing very well. But we're seeing a lot of large occupiers moving to tier 2 cities. We are seeing a lot of good retail developments coming in tier 2 cities as well. So clearly, what we're seeing happening from a sustainability perspective in tier one will start happening in tier two. And tier two cities, the usual suspects that we see these days are Jaipur, Coimbatore, Indore, Ahmedabad, Nagpur, etc.
Okay. And are the occupiers and the investors satisfied with the current regulation in terms of the ESG norms? Also, if the current green certifications are enough for the country to expand and for the sector to look at it as a full-fledged going aspect?
To answer that question, Karishma, I would not look at just I would not look at the landscape just through the lens of the investors or developers or occupiers. I would look at it in very absolute terms and ask myself the question, are we doing enough as a country? Now, PM Modi has made a commitment to achieve net zero status by 2070. What needs to be done to address that? The highest emissions in India come from three areas: cement, steel, and transport. Cement and steel directly lie at the core of real estate. And for every ton of cement produced, there's almost the same amount of emissions that are released into the atmosphere. That's a lot. Now, there is a lot of talk and research happening on green cement and green steel, but there's no legislation around it in India and in most parts of the world. Now, if you have to achieve net zero status, we have to address the emissions from cement and steel. And those are typically referred to as embodied carbon. And what most buildings, when they go for green certifications, track and measure are operational carbon emissions. That's when the building's running. So we really have to move the needle on embodied carbon as well. And we're doing, as an industry, as a country, we're taking steps, but we need to move much faster. There's a lot to be done there. And I think for that, we would need some policy interventions. We'll need some regulations, standards, etc., to come in, which will increase the demand, which will then put the pressure on cement and steel manufacturers to do the needful. Today, there's lack of awareness, hence there's no demand, and hence there's no supply as well.
Yes. Just to follow up question on that, has the industry put any kind of request or proposal to the government? I mean, what could help? What kind of law, regulation, or intervention could help the industry?
So, like we've seen on certifications, for example, there is a lot of active role that the government plays. There are government nodal agencies that have come in and established standards and ratings as well. That's working well. As far as what I was mentioning earlier, green cement and green steel, I think there we don't have any regulations that I'm aware of. But certainly, this is not something that just the government has to do. This requires a strong partnership between private enterprise and the government as well. There are coalitions that are being established. In fact, the company I represent, JLL, is part of a coalition that's going to be announced very soon. We are going to work closely with the government and help make recommendations in terms of what can drive the demand for green cement and green steel. But yes, we can actually take lessons from some of the countries in Western Europe that have managed to implement some regulations around this, and we can fast track our efforts as well.
Okay, I'm actually intrigued, Sandeep, by the fact that investors take this massive interest in investing in a green property or supporting a builder who's on that view. And also I'm intrigued by the fact that occupiers and consumers like us want to know what the building is offering. In fact, I'd like to know that what are the kind of questions that come, what are the kind of demands that usually people see when they're buying a property? For example, a consumer, are they wanting to know on the water consumption, on the recycling, on the solar panels? Because these are too technical, and like you mentioned, that it's a game about awareness which lacks. But But you see that is now developing, that is getting better if people are actually willing to pay even 10% more, but rather wanting to keep a green property and a sustainable property with less carbon footprint rather than a building that's going to only probably harm or add to the pollution.
Right. Karishma, I'll answer that in two parts. First, I'll talk about what's happening with a lot of people who work in the corporate world. Mostly organizations or corporate occupiers, they don't buy spaces, they lease spaces. And as I mentioned earlier, that one of the three important criteria when they look for office space today is how sustainable or how green that office space is. Now, of course, they do it for a few reasons. One is because it's the right thing to do. Their parent organizations probably made a statement around net zero targets, etc. So they have to look for green features. But the biggest driver for this aspiration towards green buildings or green offices is actually what their own employees are asking for. And this is a big change we saw during the pandemic. In the last 2 years, we saw a lot of employees basically asking their employers to help them feel connected with a sense of purpose. So the common question most employees asked the employer was, "Hey, why should I really work for you? Help me, connect me with the sense of purpose. What's the larger cause that you stand for as an employer, and excite me, motivate me." And employers started, or organizations, companies had to respond to that. And they realized that sustainability was one of the top 2 or 3 topics that employees felt they could identify with. And hence, when they look for office space, they started looking for buildings that had certifications. They started looking for buildings that would drive employee wellness, well-being. They started looking for spaces that would offer employees flexible working models. They started looking for spaces that offered better indoor air quality, etc. Now, the same employees, obviously, they carried the same thought process to their in their personal lives as well. So when they started looking for residential options, which we know a lot of employees started moving towards buying versus leasing residential assets in the last 2 years, they started looking for green features there as well. So we saw in the last 2 years, the younger generation and the employees in general driving sustainability at the workplace, at the same time carrying the same expectations in their personal spaces as well. I would say that's been the biggest change in the last 2 years, and that's put a lot of pressure on developers in terms of responding to those needs. And obviously, if developers don't respond, it's a business impact to them, because the consumer has many options. The consumer is going to go where the requirements are met.
Okay, that's something very interesting, and I think if the need increases, the demand increases, that could become a mandatory part of the hiring objective and the hiring proposals that most companies set out. One last question, Sandeep, before we end this, that if you could give us some information on how is the sustainable real estate scenario globally? Which are the countries that are kind of leading it, and also at what stage is India currently? And I understand that we're just kind of starting to sail the boat. But how long do you see we'll be able to come at a point where we could say that it's finally happening in the country?
So, the real estate industry used to be seen as an industry that was not as mature as some other industries like technology or banking, etc., in India a few years ago. But we've seen a very positive change in the last, I would say, 2 to 4 years. The maturity of the entire ecosystem in the real estate industry has really, really stepped up a few notches. Today, a lot of the models that we're seeing being introduced, a lot of the features that are being offered in real estate, different asset classes, a lot of the conversations we're starting to see happen are as advanced, if not even better, than what we see in many mature markets. But I think India is up there. Yes, our scale is smaller. We don't have as much real estate as, let's say, the US does from a good quality asset perspective. But the rate at which India is growing, I think we are going to catch up pretty soon. Most of the new developments are very responsible developments. You see, certainly the office spaces. Today, only 40-45% of the offices are green certified. But I think going forward, 100% of at least a grade A office stock will be green certified. And that's not just because the developers want to do it. That's because most occupiers want to move in only to green offices. I think at least 50% of all new residential construction, at least in the tier 1 cities, will have a lot more green features than ever before. So I think India is going to really see a big uptick and ramp up in green development going forward. So we're going to be up there. And if you look at the ecosystem that's supporting it, it's very encouraging as well. India is one of the fastest growing PropTech markets globally. And PropTech is nothing but technology-related technology that helps solve real-world problems in property or real estate. We have seen so much innovation that's helped not just to develop the domestic market, but also innovation that's been exported to other markets in real estate coming out of India. So I'm very bullish about India and the role it has to play going forward.
Well noted. Thank you very much, Sandeep, for this conversation and for giving us insights into, of course, the sustainability aspect of Indian real estate.
Thank you, Karishma. Thank you for the opportunity.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share, and subscribe.